All right, so we've got a pretty hefty stack of sources all about I Am Legend.
Yeah.
And, obviously it's a classic story that I think a lot of people are familiar with,
Hmm.
at least on a surface level.
Yeah.
But I'm really interested to dig into these sources because I get the sense that there's a lot more to it.
Oh, absolutely. And especially when you start comparing the book to all the different film
Yeah,
adaptations.
exactly. And, each one kind of reflects the time period it was made in.
Yeah.
So why don't we start by going all the way back to the beginning with that original 1954 novel by Richard Matheson?
Okay. Yeah.
One of the sources you sent was this YouTube video called I Am Legend by Richard Matheson, Book Review and Reaction.
Right.
And, the reviewer in that video really digs into how this story really revolutionized vampire fiction.
It really did.
So what are some of the things that stood out to you about Matheson's approach to vampires?
Well, one of the things that's really interesting is that he takes all those classic vampire tropes, like crucifixes and garlic, immortality, all that stuff, and he kind of flips them on their head.
Huh.
Like those things don't always work on the vampires in his story.
Interesting. So it's not your typical, like, Dracula kind of vampire.
Exactly. And I think that's part of what makes it so groundbreaking.
Okay, so what else?
Um, well, another thing that really stands out is that he grounds the whole vampire myth in a scientific framework.
Oh, okay. So how does he do that?
He explains their existence through symbiotes and parasites.
Wow. So it's almost like a disease then.
Right, exactly. It's not just about superstition anymore. It's about this biological and psychological transformation.
That's really interesting. So it's not just about the physical changes, it's also about how their minds are affected.
Right, and I think that sets the stage for this complex relationship we see between humans and the infected in the later adaptations.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's not just a clear-cut good versus evil kind of situation.
Exactly.
There's this gray area there.
Yeah, definitely. And it's not just about the science either.
Oh,
Matheson really delves into the psychology of his protagonist, Robert Neville.
right.
He's the last man on Earth, at least he thinks he is.
Mm-hmm.
And Matheson really forces him to confront his own humanity as he's struggling to survive.
That's heavy stuff.
It is, yeah.
So speaking of struggling to survive, one of the film adaptations we have here is the 1964 film Last Man on Earth.
Right?
And this was based on Matheson's novel, but there's this interesting thing that the Cinemassacre review you sent pointed out.
It's that.
Well, apparently the creatures in this adaptation are actually referred to as vampires, but their behavior is really zombie-like.
Yeah, I noticed that too. It's kind of weird.
Right. It's like they're kind of caught in between these two different horror archetypes.
Yeah, it's almost like the film is this missing link between the classic vampire and the modern zombie that we see today.
Oh, that's interesting. So they walk around and groan like zombies,
Yeah.
but they can also speak, and they seem to have some kind of social structure.
They're not totally mindless.
Right. Which is different from how we usually think of zombies.
Exactly.
So this movie is like a bridge between the two.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
And what's really wild is that this film predates Night of the Living Dead.
Oh, wow. The one that's like the granddaddy of all zombie movies.
Right, exactly. They came out in 1968, but Last Man on Earth was released in 1964.
Huh. So it's almost like Matheson predicted this whole zombie craze.
It's kind of spooky when you think about it.
It really is. And that same Cinemassacre review brought up another interesting point.
Okay.
It talked about how the title Last Man on Earth has been used for so many other films and even in a TV show,
Yeah, I've noticed that too.
even though it's not actually the title of Matheson's book.
Right.
So why do you think that title is so popular? Like, what is it about that phrase that just grabs people?
Well, I think it taps into this primal fear of being totally alone.
Yeah, like that feeling of isolation.
Exactly. Like imagine being the last person left on Earth.
Oh, man. I don't even want to think about it.
It's pretty terrifying, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's why that title, Last Man on Earth, is so powerful.
Yeah.
It just throws you right into that raw existential fear.
And it makes you think, like, how would you even cope with that?
Exactly. Like, what would you do? What would be the point?
Big questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's jump ahead a few decades and talk about the 2007 adaptation of I Am Legend, the one with Will Smith.
Okay.
Obviously this one's a lot more recent, so a lot of our listeners have probably seen it.
Probably.
But you sent this thrifty typewriter video that goes into a lot of detail about this film, and there's this whole controversy surrounding the alternate ending.
Yeah, that was a big deal.
So can you explain what the differences are between the theatrical ending and this alternate one?
Well, the theatrical ending, we get that classic action movie climax.
Yeah.
Will Smith's character, Neville, he sacrifices himself to save humanity.
Right.
Takes out a whole horde of those infected with a grenade.
It's pretty epic visually.
Oh, yeah. It's a big Michael Bay kind of explosion.
But the thrifty typewriter video argues that this ending actually strays pretty far from Matheson's original vision.
It does. And I think the alternate ending is much closer to the book.
Okay, so tell me about that one.
Well, in the alternate ending, Neville realizes that he's become the monster in the eyes of the infected.
Oh, wow. So it's like a complete flip in perspective.
It is. It makes you question who the real monsters are.
I see. So the infected, they're not just mindless creatures in this version.
Right. The film shows that they have emotions, they have some kind of social structure, and they even show compassion in some scenes.
So it's like they're evolving into a new species almost.
Exactly. And Neville, he's become a threat to them.
Huh. So instead of being the hero who saves humanity, he's actually like the villain in their story.
It's a really interesting twist. And it's a much more thought-provoking ending than the theatrical one.
Yeah, it really makes you think about the whole concept of good and evil,
Absolutely.
especially in the context of survival. You know what happens when the very act of trying to save humanity turns you into the enemy?
That's the question the film is asking.
Heavy stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Not your typical popcorn flick.
Okay, so we've talked about the book and we've talked about the 2007 adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
But there's another film adaptation that I want to touch on, The Omega Man from 1971.
Oh, yeah. The one with Charlton Heston.
Exactly. Now, I remember you saying you found some really interesting trivia about this film in that film drop video you sent.
Oh, yeah. There's some good stuff in there.
So spill the beans. What are some of the highlights?
Well, for starters, they actually filmed a lot of the movie in downtown Los Angeles.
Wow, really?
Yeah, and they did it on weekends so they could capture that deserted city feel.
That must have been a logistical nightmare.
I can't even imagine.
And there was that story about Charlton Heston accidentally crashing a car during a fight scene.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
He wasn't exactly known for his stunt driving skills.
Well, I guess that's what stunt doubles are for.
Right.
Wow.
But, it's those kinds of behind-the-scenes stories that make these movies even more interesting.
They really do. It just adds like a human element to the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like, even in these big-budget productions, things don't always go according to plan.
Right. But beyond the trivia, there's something really significant about the casting in The Omega Man.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You're talking about Rosalind Cash being cast as Heston's love interest.
Exactly. Now, remember, this was 1971.
Oh, yeah. Things were very different back then.
Right. And to have a black woman cast as the love interest of a white male lead,
It was pretty groundbreaking.
it was. There was even a scene with an interracial kiss between them.
Wow. And I bet that caused quite a stir back then.
You better believe it.
Yeah.
It was one of the first interracial kisses in film history.
That's incredible. It really speaks volumes about how the film was trying to challenge social norms, even within this post-apocalyptic setting.
Exactly. It was making a statement about the future, about a world where race isn't a barrier.
That's powerful,
Wow.
especially considering the historical context.
Definitely. It adds a whole other layer of complexity to the film.
So it's not just a mindless action flick.
No, not at all. The Omega Man doesn't shy away from social commentary.
So what are some of the other themes that the film explores?
Well, it touches on societal collapse,
Mm-hmm.
the fear of disease, and the search for meaning in a world that's gone mad.
Those are some pretty heavy themes.
They are, yeah.
Yeah.
But they're also very relevant to the time period when the film was made.
Oh, absolutely. With the Vietnam War, the Cold War, the threat of nuclear annihilation.
Right. It was a time of great uncertainty and anxiety.
So it makes sense that those anxieties would find their way into a film like The Omega Man.
Yeah, it's like this post-apocalyptic story gave people a way to process their fears.
And in a way, we're still grappling with those same fears today,
That's true.
just in different forms. Disease, social unrest, climate change. The threats have evolved, but the underlying fear is still the same.
You're right. It's like this human need to confront these fears through storytelling.
It's timeless.
It really is.
Okay, so we've looked at Last Man on Earth and The Omega Man.
Mm.
Should we circle back to the 2007 adaptation and unpack some of the more nuanced details?
Yeah, I think that would be good.
Especially all the symbolism that thrifty typewriter video highlighted.
Right, like that
Yeah.
butterfly motif.
Yeah. What do you think that's all about?
Well, I think the butterfly represents transformation and evolution.
Okay.
It's like this reminder that even in the midst of all this destruction, something new can emerge.
So it's not just about the end of the world?
No, it's also about the possibility of a new beginning.
Interesting.
It's like nature's way of saying, this isn't the end. It's a new start.
And what about that scene with the lions eating the deer?
Oh, yeah. That one's pretty intense.
It is. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it underscores this idea of the natural order persisting even when civilization collapses.
So even though humanity has fallen apart, nature just keeps on going.
Exactly. It's like the film is asking, who are we to think we're above nature?
Right. It challenges our whole idea of human exceptionalism.
Definitely. We like to see ourselves as the dominant species. But in a world where society is crumbled, we're just another animal.
Subject to the same forces of nature.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that ties back to Matheson's whole exploration of what it means to be human.
Right. When those boundaries are pushed to their limits.
Yeah, like, are we really that different from the monsters?
Deep thoughts.
I know, right?
But before we get too deep into that philosophical rabbit hole, I want to talk about how the 2007 film portrays the infected.
Okay.
They're called the Dark Seekers in this one, right?
Right.
And the Thrifty Typewriter video made this really interesting argument that they're not just mindless zombies.
Yeah, I thought that was fascinating.
So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the film does a really good job of showing that the Darkseekers are intelligent,
Okay.
they're strategic, and they even seem to have some level of emotional depth.
Okay, so give me an example.
Well, remember that scene where Neville observes them setting traps?
Oh, yeah.
They weren't just shambling around aimlessly.
Right.
They were planning and coordinating their attacks.
That's a little creepy.
It is.
Mm.
And then there's that scene where Neville captures one of the infected sphere's experiments,
Mm-hmm.
and you can see this flicker of fear in its eyes,
Yeah.
almost like a sense of pleading.
So you're saying they're not totally devoid of emotion?
I think that's what the film is trying to show.
It's like they're blurring the lines between human and monster.
Right, and it makes you question our own perceptions of sentience and intelligence.
It's deep.
It is, and it's something that we see throughout all the I Am Legend adaptations.
But it's especially potent in the 2007 film.
I agree.
Okay, so another thing I wanted to touch on is this idea of the search for a cure.
Oh.
You know, it's not just about survival in these stories. It's
Yeah.
also about reclaiming a lost world.
About holding on to hope.
Exactly. But the Thrifty Typewriter video brings up this ethical question.
What's that?
Well, if these infected aren't just mindless zombies,
Yeah.
if they're actually a new evolving species, then does humanity have the right to try and eradicate them?
That's a tough one.
It is. It's a very complex question.
With no easy answers.
And I think that's part of what makes I Am Legend so compelling.
Definitely.
It forces us to confront these moral dilemmas.
These gray areas.
Right, where the lines between right and wrong become blurred.
Exactly.
Okay, so now I want to shift gears a bit and talk about the original novel again.
Okay.
It's amazing how Matheson wrote a story that still resonates so strongly all these years later.
It really is.
And it's inspired so many adaptations and interpretations.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think are some of the most groundbreaking or influential aspects of the novel?
Well, I think Matheson's brilliance lies in his ability to weave together all these different genres.
Like what?
Science fiction, horror, psychological thriller.
So it's not just a straight-up vampire story.
No, it's much more than that.
What else?
Well, it's also about isolation,
Right.
loss, and the fragility of the human psyche.
It sounds pretty intense.
It is. He really digs deep into Robert Neville's internal struggles.
You know, being the last man on Earth surrounded by these creatures that he doesn't even fully understand.
Yeah, it's a very lonely existence.
That's a great point. And it's something that book review video really emphasized.
The I Am Legend by Richard Matheson, book review and reaction.
Yeah, that's the one. The reviewer was saying how it's one of the most profound explorations of loneliness he's ever encountered in literature.
I can see why you'd say that.
Right? It's like Matheson captures that feeling of being totally alone, trapped in your own mind.
With all your fears and memories.
Exactly. And I think that's a universal human experience.
It is. We've all felt that way at some point in our lives.
Maybe not to the same extent as Robert Neville,
Hopefully not.
but that feeling of being abandoned, of being the last one left.
It's primal.
Yeah, it is. It's like a fear that goes beyond time and culture.
And what's even more remarkable is how Matheson manages to weave all this psychological depth into a fast-paced, suspenseful narrative.
So it's not just like a slow burn character study,
No. It's got action. It's got thrills.
but it also makes you think.
Exactly.
Oh.
It's the best of both worlds.
It sounds like he was a really talented writer.
He was. He doesn't shy away from the darkness, but he also offers these glimmers of hope.
Moments of resilience.
Yeah. Reminders of the strength of the human spirit.
And then there's the ending.
Oh, yeah. We can't forget about that.
The twist where Neville realizes he's become the legend, the monster in the eyes of this new society.
It's such a brilliant reversal of perspective.
Right. The man who thought he was fighting for humanity.
Becomes the villain.
Exactly. It challenges our whole idea of who the real monsters are.
And it makes you reconsider the nature of good and evil.
It's almost like it's saying that history repeats itself.
Yeah, how the oppressed can become the oppressors.
That's a powerful message.
And so that's still relevant today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We see these cycles of violence and prejudice repeating themselves over and over again.
It's like we haven't learned from the past.
So, I Am Legend, it's more than just a post-apocalyptic thriller. It's a social commentary.
A reflection of our own flaws as a species.
And that's the real legacy of Matheson's work.
I think so.
He gave us a story that continues to evolve
To find new meaning.
with each generation.
Yeah, it's a story that speaks to our deepest fears and our greatest hopes.
And it reminds us that even in a world that often feels chaotic and uncertain.
The human spirit can endure.
Okay, so before we wrap up this first part of our deep dive,
Yeah.
I want to circle back to the Omega Man for a moment.
Okay.
The film drop video mentions some deleted scenes that sound pretty intriguing.
Oh, yeah, they're fascinating.
So what are your thoughts on those?
Well, they offer this glimpse into alternative storylines and character developments.
That could have changed the whole film.
Exactly. And one of the scenes that the video highlighted was this scene where Lisa Rosalind Cash's character,
Yeah.
she visits her parents' graves.
Oh, wow.
It's this really poignant moment that reveals her deep connection to her past.
Even though she's embracing this new future?
Right. And I think it would add a whole other layer of emotional depth to her character.
Yeah, I can see that.
It shows her grappling with loss and the weight of responsibility.
It's the survival of her people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder why they cut it.
It does. It's like they had this really powerful scene.
And they just left it on the cutting room floor.
It's a reminder that filmmaking is a process of choices.
Yeah, so sometimes you have to sacrifice moments that might enrich the story.
But ultimately don't fit with the director's vision.
Right.
But even without those deleted scenes, the Omega Man is still a really powerful and thought-provoking adaptation.
It is.
I mean, the way it portrays the conflict between those last remnants of humanity.
And the albino mutants.
Yeah, it's incredibly evocative.
It really taps into our fears about difference and the other.
And those fears are still very relevant today.
Absolutely.
But beyond the social commentary, there's something deeply human about Nebel's struggle in that film.
Yeah, what is it about his character that resonates with you?
Well, he's fighting for survival, obviously.
But he's also desperately searching for connection.
Yeah.
For a sense of belonging.
In a world that's become alien and hostile.
Right, and it's that longing for connection that drives him to risk everything.
For Lisa and the others.
Exactly. Even in this bleakest of circumstances.
The human spirit still yearns for companionship.
And love.
It's a powerful message.
And it brings us back to what makes I Am Legend so compelling.
In all its different forms.
Right. It's not just about surviving the apocalypse.
It's about what it means to be human.
To confront our fears.
To embrace our vulnerabilities.
And to search for meaning.
In a world that often feels chaotic and uncertain.
And that's a search that resonates with all of us.
Yeah, whether we've faced a global pandemic
or a personal crisis,
we all crave connection and a sense of belonging.
And I Am Legend reminds us that even in the face of unimaginable adversity,
those human desires persist.
So we've journeyed through several I Am Legend adaptations.
Yeah, well, yeah.
We've seen how each one offers a unique perspective on Matheson's powerful novel.
We have explored the evolution of the monster.
From classic vampire to ambiguous undead.
To a potentially new species.
It's been quite a ride.
It has. And we've delved into these themes of isolation and fear.
The search for a cure.
And the ethical dilemmas that arise when the line between human and monster becomes blurred.
It's a lot to think about.
It is. But now I want to turn the conversation over to you, our listener.
What are your thoughts on all this?
What stands out to you from all these different interpretations of I Am Legend?
What resonates most with you?
It's a really tough question.
Yeah.
And there's another layer to all this, too.
What's that?
Well, the 2007 film also touches on the whole search for a cure thing.
Right.
It's not just about surviving. It's about reclaiming what was lost, holding on to that hope for a future.
That makes sense.
But then the Thrifty Typewriter video brings up some pretty interesting ethical questions about that whole cure thing.
Oh, yeah, like what?
Well, like if these infected aren't just mindless zombies, right?
Yeah. If they're like a new species that's evolving, does humanity even have the right to try and wipe them out?
That's a good point. It's tricky.
It is, yeah. It's a really complex question. with no easy answers.
And it's questions like that that I think make I Am Legend so fascinating to talk about.
Totally. It makes you think.
It does. Hey, so
Yeah.
let's go back to the original novel for a minute.
Okay.
It's incredible how Matheson crafted a story that still resonates so deeply with people all these years later.
It really is amazing.
It's inspired countless adaptations and
It's
interpretations.
definitely a classic for a reason.
So in your opinion, what aspects of the novel stand out as particularly groundbreaking or influential?
Well, I think one of the most impressive things about Matheson is his ability to blend all these different genres together.
Like what?
You've got science fiction elements, you've got horror, obviously, and then there's this psychological thriller aspect to it as well.
So it's not just a simple monster story.
No, not at all. It's much more layered than that. Well, it's a story about isolation,
Mm.
about loss, and about how fragile the human psyche can be.
Especially when you're facing something as terrifying as the end of the world.
Exactly. And Matheson really delves into the main character, Robert Neville's internal struggles.
Being the last man on Earth surrounded by these creatures that he barely understands.
Right. It's a really lonely existence.
And that sense of isolation is something that book review video we talked about really emphasized.
The one called I Am Legend by Richard Matheson, book review and reaction.
Yeah, the reviewer said it was one of the most profound explorations of loneliness he'd ever read.
I could see why he said that.
Right. Matheson really captures what it feels like to be utterly alone.
Trapped in your own head with all your fears and memories.
And that's something that I think we can all relate to on some level.
Absolutely. We've all felt that way at some point.
Yeah.
Even if it wasn't as extreme as what Neville goes through.
Let's hope not.
Yeah, for sure. But it's that feeling of being abandoned, of being the last one left.
It's a primal fear.
Yeah, and it's something that goes beyond time and cultural boundaries.
What I find really impressive is how Matheson is able to weave all this psychological depth into a story that's also fast-paced and suspenseful.
Oh, absolutely. He keeps you on the edge of your seat.
Right. It's not like you're just reading a slow character study.
No, it's got action, it's got thrills.
But it also makes you think.
It's the best of both worlds.
It really is. He was a master storyteller.
He was. And then there's that ending.
Oh, yeah. We can't forget about that ending.
It's one of the most iconic twists in literature.
The whole thing where Neville realizes that he's become the legend, the monster in the eyes of this new society.
Right. It's such a brilliant reversal of perspective.
The man who thought he was the hero fighting for humanity
Ends up being the villain in their story.
It really makes you question everything.
It does. It challenges our assumptions about who the good guys and the bad guys are.
And it forces us to look at things from a different point of view.
And I think it also speaks to this idea that history repeats itself.
You know how the oppressed can become the oppressors?
It's a powerful message, and unfortunately one that's still relevant today.
Absolutely. I'm Legend, it's not just a post-apocalyptic thriller.
Right.
It's a commentary on society, on human nature.
It's a reflection of our own flaws as a species.
And that's what makes Matheson's work so timeless.
I think so.
He gave us a story that continues to challenge us.
To make us think critically about our place in the world.
And our responsibility to others.
And even though it's a pretty bleak story,
Yeah, definitely.
it ultimately offers a message of hope.
Hope in the face of adversity.
Hope for the resilience of the human spirit.
And hope for connection, even in a world that can often feel fragmented and isolating.
Exactly.
We started this whole deep dive talking about how I Am Legend seems to resonate with every generation.
Yeah, how it reflects the anxieties and the hopes of its time.
But maybe there's something even deeper at play here.
Something that goes beyond those specific cultural and historical contexts.
Maybe it's that primal fear of being alone, of being the last one left.
That resonates with us on a fundamental level.
Because deep down, we all crave connection.
Community.
A sense of belonging.
And in a world that often feels increasingly divided and isolating.
That need for connection feels more important than ever.
And maybe that's why I Am Legend, with all its themes of isolation and the search for meaning.
It continues to capture our imaginations.
And spark these really passionate discussions.
It's a story that reminds us that even when we're surrounded by what we perceive as monsters,
the human spirit can endure.
We can find strength in ourselves.
In each other.
And in the power of hope.
And that brings us back to the Omega Man for a moment.
Oh.
Remember that film drop video we were talking about?
Yeah, the one with all the behind-the-scenes trivia.
We would also mention some deleted scenes that I thought were really fascinating.
Oh, yeah. What were those all about?
Well, they offer a glimpse into some alternative storylines and character development.
That could change the whole movie.
They really could have. And one of the scenes that really stood out to me was this scene where Lisa.
Rosalind Cash's character.
Yeah, she goes to visit her parents' graves.
Wow, that's heavy.
It is. It's a very poignant moment that reveals her deep connection to her past.
Even though she's trying to build a new future.
Right. It would have added so much more depth to her character.
Yeah, I can see that.
You know, showing her grappling with that loss and that sense of responsibility for her people.
And it makes you wonder why they decided to cut it.
I know, right? Such a powerful scene.
It really is. It's a shame they left it on the cutting room floor.
It is. But, you know, filmmaking is a process of making tough choices.
Right? Sometimes you have to sacrifice moments that might enrich the story.
But ultimately don't fit with the director's overall vision.
It's all about finding that balance.
Exactly. And even without those deleted scenes, The Omega Man is still a really powerful and thought-provoking film.
It is. The way it portrays that conflict between those last remnants of humanity.
And the albino mutants.
It's really effective.
It is. It taps into those deep-seated fears about difference and otherness.
Fears that are still very much present in our world today.
Unfortunately, yeah. But beyond all the social commentary, there's something deeply human about Neville's struggle in that film.
Absolutely. He's fighting for survival, of course, but he's also searching for connection.
For a sense of belonging in a world that's become completely alien to him.
And it's that longing for connection that drives him to risk everything for Lisa and the others.
It really does. It shows that even in the bleakest of
The
circumstances,
human spirit still yearns for companionship and love.
it's a powerful message.
And it brings us back to the core of what makes I Am Legend so compelling in all its different forms.
It's not just about surviving the apocalypse.
It's about what it means to be human.
To confront our fears and to embrace our vulnerabilities.
And to search for meaning in a world that can often feel chaotic and uncertain.
And that search is something that I think we all relate to.
Whether we faced a global pandemic or just our own personal struggles.
We all crave connection.
Purpose.
Sense of belonging.
And I Am Legend reminds us that even in the face of unimaginable adversity,
Those fundamental human desires persist. It's a really tough question. You know, there are so many different angles to consider.
Yeah, I mean, for me, one of the things that keeps coming back to mind is how each adaptation portrays the infected.
Right. They're all so different.
It's like the monster itself is evolving.
Along with our understanding of what it means to be human.
Exactly.
That's a really interesting way to put it.
You know, in Last Man on Earth, they're like these almost mindless hordes.
Right, like a faceless enemy.
But then in the 2007 film, they're much more complex.
The Dark Seekers.
Yeah, they're organized, they communicate, they even show moments of compassion.
It's like they're becoming more human in a way.
And I think that reflects the changing times, you know?
How so?
Well, think about it. In 1964, when Last Man on Earth came out, the Cold War was in full swing.
Right, and the threat of nuclear war was very real.
Exactly. So the fear was this faceless enemy, this unknown force that could wipe us all out.
Makes sense.
But by 2007, the world had changed.
Yeah. We had 9/11, the war on terror.
A growing awareness of social injustices.
So the fear became more nuanced.
Right. It wasn't just about this external threat anymore.
It was about the enemy within.
The monsters in our midst.
And the Dark Seekers in the 2007 film, they embody that fear.
They're not just mindless, they're intelligent, they're strategic.
And they're capable of feeling.
Right. Which makes them all the more terrifying.
It's like the closer they get to being human, the more frightening they become.
And let's not forget the Omega Man.
Oh, yeah, good point.
That one came out in 1971.
A time of huge social and political upheaval.
Exactly. The Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement.
The fear of the other was very real.
And those albino mutants in the film, they represent that fear.
The fear of those who are different, who challenge the status quo.
And then you have the casting of Rosalind Cash as Heston's love interest.
Right. An interracial couple in 1971.
That was a bold move.
It was a statement about the future, about a world where race doesn't matter.
It's incredible how I Am Legend manages to weave together all these complex social and cultural threads.
While still delivering a really gripping story.
Right. It's a testament to the power of storytelling.
How it can reflect and even shape our understanding of the world.
It makes you think about what it really means to be human.
Yeah, are we defined by our reason, our compassion, our ability to connect with others?
Or is it something more primal, something more instinctual that drives us?
Big questions.
They are. And Matheson's novel doesn't give us any easy answers.
Neither do the
And
adaptations,
they just present us with these flawed characters
making difficult choices.
in extraordinary circumstances.
And it's up to us to figure out what it all means,
To grapple with those choices.
to examine our own values and beliefs.
That's what makes I Am Legend so relevant, I think.
It challenges us to think critically about our place in the world.
About our responsibility to others.
And even though it's a dark story,
Yeah, pretty bleak at times.
there's still a message of hope there.
Hope in the face of adversity.
Hope for the resilience of the human spirit,
And hope for the possibility of connection.
even in a world that often feels so fragmented and isolating.
We started this deep dive talking about how I Am Legend seems to resonate with every generation.
How it reflects the anxieties and aspirations of its time.
But I think there's something even deeper at play here.
Something universal,
Maybe it's that primal fear of being alone.
of being the last one left.
That's a fear that taps into something very fundamental about what it means to be human.
Our need for connection,
For community,
for belonging.
and in a world that often feels increasingly divided and isolating.
That need for connection feels more urgent than ever.
And maybe that's why I Am Legend, with all its themes of isolation and the search for meaning,
It continues to resonate with us.
it reminds us that even in the darkest of times,
Even when we're surrounded by what we perceive as monsters,
the human spirit can endure,
we can find strength in ourselves, in each other.
and in the enduring power of hope.
Well said.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into I Am Legend,
Yeah.
I think we're left with one final thought to ponder.
What's that?
What legend will you leave behind?
That's a good one.
What stories will you tell? What choices will you make?
The future is unwritten.
And the legend is yours to create.